of that.
Okay, great. Yeah, I know a lot of people are in that situation. So what I'm going to do is kind of get us started with an introduction, and then Debbie is prepared to give you a lot of information. So I'll be turning it over to her. I ask that you go ahead and write down any questions that you have, and at the end, we'll either open up the chat or we'll do the hand raise button, whichever works best for us, and make sure that we ask Debbie those questions. We can really only stay on here about an hour today. So if you end up having questions that we don't get to, feel free to write those down, send them to us by email, and maybe I can write another blog post, or the next speaker that comes on next week can take care of that. Okay, so today our goal is to discuss the best practices for reopening our children's ministry. We're coming at this with the assumption that your church has or will make the decision to reopen. We're not taking up the question of should we reopen. So we're assuming right now that you're getting information for that point in time that you will reopen. Should we reopen is a whole nother discussion, and it's the one that I expect to have next week with Dr. Hurley. So if you go ahead and mark down 10 a.m. Tuesday next week, Dr. Hurley, who is an elder and also retired pediatrician, is going to chat with me about that, and his wife leads their children's ministry. So let me introduce myself. I know most of you, but just in case, I'm Dr. Shannon Rains. I teach at Lubbock Christian University. I'm the children's ministry professor there. I've served in children's ministry for 15 years until LCU called and said, come teach for us. And so now my passion is equipping ministers for their work in the field. So if that's our students, that's great. If that's people like you that's already in the work in the field, I just want to see everyone be better equipped children's ministers. I've started a blog, and I blog at the ConfidentKidmen.com, theconfidentkidmen.com. And the idea there is that same thing. I want to equip you, so I want you to have better confidence when you're in the field, working in your churches, when you encounter questions like this one that we have. Other things to know, Bridget Price is on the phone with us. She is with Hope Network. Hi, Bridget. Hope has made this possible. Bridget and others there have put in time and effort, a lot of time and effort to get this off the ground quickly, because we knew you needed this information. And so we want to thank Hope Network for all the provisions that they've made. I'm an associate with Hope, and I can tell you they have many great things to support your ministries. One of those things is a COVID-19 page that, has it launched yet, Bridget? Yes. Or will be launching? Okay.
It is.
It has launched on Hope's website, and it's for church leaders as they work through these questions. So this podcast or video call will end up there, along with a lot of other resources. Send your ministers, your elders, other leaders there, and that'll be helpful. So a couple of other items. We talked about how we need to send chat questions. That's because we had we now have 72 online. So we had 70 registered. We now have 72 online. We may have more than that. So we're just trying to control the traffic flow. I know most of you, and I know you like to chat with each other, so I'm sorry we can't do that today. We need that support in our lives, but it's just a little difficult on a call like this. And like I said, mark down next week, Tuesday at 10 a.m., and we'll speak with Dr. Hurley. So now I'm going to introduce our speaker for today. And the one thing I forgot to do, Debbie, is ask you how you say your last name.
Zancanaro.
Zancanaro. Okay, I had been guessing and I was close. So Dr. Debbie Zancanaro is our speaker, and she is a retired pediatrician. She's also on Hope Network's board of directors, and that's how I ended up connecting with her. She practiced medicine for 35 years. Some of that was in private practice, but a lot of that was also in a teaching hospital, so teaching medical students the craft or the practice of medicine, which is why she's going to be great at teaching us today. I've already gotten to hear what she said. That was in the blog post that some of y'all read, was our first conversation. And I know that you're going to be, this is really going to benefit your ministries. So let me kick off with this. Debbie teaches in their children's ministry also, so she's familiar with our context of what it looks like to serve children. But I want to start with this, Dr. Zancanaro. Could you tell us just a little bit about your location and what it looks like to live in this time of pandemic there in your state? So remind me where you live.
I am just
north of Indianapolis by a few blocks, in the closest suburb to Indianapolis. We have, because partially of our proximity to Chicago, we are still fairly active in this. They thought our peak would be April 30th. And so they're soon going to start talking about loosening up some stuff here. But the schools are not going to reopen this year. They're still recommending that no groups greater than, I think they're going to go to 10, which is still going to make meeting as a church impossible. But we have about 860 deaths in Indiana so far, and many thousands of cases. We have, like I said, we're close to Chicago-ish. I mean, we're about 4 hours away, but that's probably the biggest local impact. And our county is the third largest number of cases. Indianapolis is the most, that county, and the one closest to Chicago is second, and then we're third. So there's still a lot of activity with the virus in our area, and quite honestly, it's going to be here for months and months. That's one of the things that makes all of this kind of important, because it's impractical to be closed for months, but there've got to be some real pointed efforts to make getting together safer before we do it.
Yeah. So I wanted her to explain her location because, of course, that impacts what it looks like to reopen. So some locations are not experiencing the virus at the same level. And so your elders may be having a different conversation. But because she is so close to some of the hot spots or some places that are, very much impacted, I think her advice is going to lean into what's the best possible things we can do, because she's really having to think through that in a situation where a lot more people might be affected and a lot more people have been sidelined or even killed by the virus. So Debbie, I'm going to let you take it now. So just, it's all yours. Start talking through what we need to know as children's ministers.
I think that one of the things that Shannon just mentioned is very important. It's the same old one size doesn't fit all thing. So whenever you start up, you're going to have to give some thought into how aggressive you're going to be with some of these items, because it may not be as big a deal for you, but especially, Dallas, Fort Worth, Houston, the bigger places in Texas, the bigger cities overall are going to have to be much slower and more conscientious than some of the other places. And you may not even be at your peak yet. I'm not sure. I know that it's slower coming to some places. We've flattened the curve, but by flattening the curve, we extended the curve. So where it could have been a real up and down, now it's kind of an up and plateau, and it's just going to keep going. And there are still going to be deaths from this in August, but it's not going to be nearly the number. And but you're still going to have to be aware of the people who are high risk. And it's a fact of life that a lot of the churches are skewed very heavily to the older age groups. So a lot of this planning is not necessarily for your kids in your congregation, but for the older people in the congregation. Because if we take these numbers off again, governors won't hesitate to close it all down again. And it's just going to extend the whole thing that much longer, because the more we're closed, the longer it's going to be around. And that's just a fact. What I've got are a few suggestions for opening your children's ministry, taking into account more than anything else, the developmental level of the kids that you've got. You're going to have an entirely different approach. Hold on, I'm going to shut my door so that we don't hear the lawnmower. Excuse me, they would pick now to mow. But the same things that that you take into account of different cities require different things, different age groups require different things. And that's where you're really going to fall into the problems or the adjustments. I really think that because of the ability to take care of infants with social distancing, you're just going to have to make a blanket rule about babies or even people in diapers. You're not going to be able to change diapers with social distancing. So my recommendation would be that anybody who's in diapers doesn't go to children's worship right now. There's going to be some even 3-year-olds who aren't out of diapers yet, and that's going to start to be a discussion point with your families, because the parents are going to be annoyed that their 3-year-old can't go when another 3-year-old can go. But I think more than anything, it's just a matter of dealing with the diapers. To keep the kids separate, I would recommend some way of labeling a particular area for a particular child. For younger kids, it might be just mats that they sit on with their name on it, and they always go to their mat. If you can get the mats laminated, that would be perfect, because then you could wipe them off. I don't know if Gordon Food Services is a thing in many of your areas, but I think they're national. But if there's not a Gordon Food Services, there's something like that, where you could go and buy big packages of placemats like they use in restaurants, which are very cheap. If you did that and you put their name on it and you laminated it, then that's that kid's spot. And if they're too young to read, you might do different pictures. You know, you're going to be the raccoon for now. You're going to be the elephant for now. And they're always that same place. If those mats were put out on the floor before they got there and they knew where they had to go, or where they should go, that would be ideal. I would recommend that you, as they come in, you give each one of them a dose of hand sanitizer. And then when they're all in, and perhaps you're not going to be able to hold everybody out in the hall long enough to do child by child by child, but if you could put it in their hands and tell them they just have to hold it, and then they go find their mat, then you can make it a class activity where you sing a song, they sanitize their hands for the length of the song, and you can make sure that they both spend the right amount of time, and you can demonstrate the technique. You can make sure they hit all their fingertips and their thumb and their first finger especially, because that's what they're going to use the most. But then they've got that. As you get older children and they've got chairs, I would recommend making a name tag that you could tape on the back of a chair. And that chair is always going to be that child's chair. Before they come to class, I would recommend sanitizing tabletops. Every classroom has a big bottle of hand sanitizer and a container of Clorox wipes. The teacher can come a few minutes early, Clorox the table, Clorox whatever the handles on the doors and things like that, and then have the hand sanitizer available to give all the kids as they come in. When they leave, you sanitize the tabletops and the chairs and the mats. So you're ready for the next week. Children's ministries as a whole have a lot of hands-on stuff that they do. And an easy way to keep kids from all handling the same things is to get a plastic grocery bag for each child, label it with their name, and in that bag goes a few markers, a few crayons, a pair of scissors. If you have individual Bibles, an individual Bible in each one, and they only do their bag. They pick up their bag when they go sit on their mat. And then they return their bag to an area so that the teacher's not touching all the bags that the kids have touched. But the kids have access to items that they may use for crafts. there are kids who are going to be able to follow the directions and kids who aren't. And there has to be a plan for the kids who aren't able to follow directions, who won't stay on their mat, who have a sudden need to go to the bathroom in the middle of the class. And so you have to be ready for that. And a way to make that happen safely for the rest of the class, you can't leave, is to have in each area of the children's ministry have 1 or 2 hall monitors. These people I would give gloves and masks to, because by definition, they're dealing with the kids who can't follow the directions, or they're dealing with a sick child that you're sending out of the class back to their parents. So that person should have PPE. The bathrooms, I would have 1 bathroom that is for the children's ministry that is labeled so that miscellaneous adults aren't going in, and it's just for the kids. And then when the hall monitor gets the kid from the room, or the teacher sticks her head out and says, he or she says, this one needs to go to the bathroom. Then after they take them to the bathroom, they can have a can of Lysol spray where they spray down the seat. They spray down the flusher. They spray down the sink in between kids. And then after the whole class is over, someone can clean the bathroom more efficiently, whoever gets that lucky job. But you can make it safer in between the kids and safer for the person taking them. One of the things that you're going to have to worry about is also not uncooperative children, but uncooperative parents. So before you even do this, you have to, I think you should communicate with all the parents with your elder's blessing, so it's not just you coming out with it, but it's got some gravitas to it that explains that, you know, these are unusual times, this isn't going to go on forever, but we all got to buy into it. Explain that your classes are going to try and be separate. Explain the theory up front that if a child can't cooperate, whether it's a 4-year-old or it's a 12-year-old, they're going to be returned back to their parents. And that's another thing the hall monitor will do, is take the kids back to their parents. The parents will have to believe you're really going to do it. And if you do, the first time you do it, I suspect all of those parents are going to be just as mad at you as they are at anything. And you've got to be willing to have some talks with them. Another thing that comes into play, and about communicating that to the parents, I think you have to do it multiple ways, because we've all had cases where we've printed up information, we've given it to the child, and you find it on the floor in the family hall after they've gone. So I would send it out by email. I would send it out if your church is sending out bulletins, have it in there, or a weekly communication, have it in there. And then I would also have it available in print, because there are people who come, at least I know in our congregation's case, there are people who come who fairly regularly and but have never really officially joined, which I hate that phrase, but and they don't get those communications email. You know, they may be coming for 6 months and not be getting those things. The other thing about the way that we work is that everybody kind of comes in together and goes out together, and that's not going to work. If you could have an area where kids, if you don't already, have an area where kids check in and you kind of block the children's hall so that the parents aren't actually going in there, then you can have the older kids can get to their class by themselves. They know where they're going. The younger kids, the hall monitors can take them before they, you know, become fixed in the halls. When you're letting them go, most churches have like a buzzer or a bell or something, and everyone dumps into the hall. And that's not going to work anymore either. And what we're going to have to do is have classes roll out, but have kids released a little bit apart so that they can maintain some distance. The hardest thing is going to be telling all these little girls they can't hug on each other. And you've got to do it in a good way, that we're just going to try and keep everybody from getting sick. And right now, this is what we have to do. But let them know that this isn't forever. If you've got outside facilities like playgrounds, it's best that they don't play on the playgrounds for a while, because they're all going to be falling all over each other on the climbing things, and pushing each other on the swings. And so that's something that I wouldn't initiate till you've proved for a few weeks that things are continuing to be good in your area. If nothing props up again, then gradually loosen it up, and you might loosen it up for age groups. Quite honestly, the 12-year-olds don't need to be playing on the swing set. I mean, they go out there and they swing and they talk, but you could leave those areas for the younger kids who are going to be more likely to need the outlet of climbing and jumping and running. If you can have classes outside, sometimes that would be great, because there's so much more area to spread out over. You can make games where the kids are spread out so they're not touching each other. I think the biggest thing about this is going to be the communication, and that's going to be so, so important to keep everybody from getting too hyper about it, too upset if their child is one of the ones that's returned. And that, returning them 1 week doesn't mean they can't come back ever. But it gives them all the idea that you're serious about it. And it would be really good if you could get your elders on board and talk to them first. I would suggest a teacher's day before you have the first opening, so that everybody's got a chance to go over their room once, with some Clorox wipes and some making up the bags, figuring out how you're going to distribute the seat pads. I would suggest they are distributed before the kids even get there. Labeling the chairs so everyone knows where they're supposed to be. You can make things simpler by planning ahead. If the worst thing happens and you find that the kids just aren't going to cooperate, then you may have to just make an announcement that we're going to not do it this week, we're not going to do it the next week, and we'll try again in 3 weeks, or in a couple more weeks. Because that gives the parents time to talk to their kids about why it didn't work. And it actually is a motivator for them if they really want to come. Otherwise, they're going to be sitting with their parents, which most of them are not used to. It's not like when I was growing up and we all sat in that row. They're all gone. They don't know what it's like to sit for 45 minutes. So I think you're going to have to do some education with that, and maybe use it as a teaching moment. I also mentioned to Shannon that there are some 3-year-olds out there who are perfectly capable of being toilet trained and are just choosing not to. And if they find out that they're not going to be allowed to go to class in diapers, you may be surprised how many kids suddenly are toilet trained, because they're going to want to be included. Let me real quick look over my list and see if there's...
Well, and there's something I thought, can you hear me okay? I took out my headphones because they weren't working. You mentioned this a minute ago. You said in case the worst happens, and my mind went to, you were going to talk about if somebody actually is sick, like they came and we found out they were sick. And then you had another, if the worst happens, that was also really good. But can you talk to us also about what would it look like? What do we need to do? First of all, if we have a child that comes in and they're coughing, they just look sick. But second, what if we get the phone call that says, okay, you reopened and then you had a family that has been exposed and some of them are sick and they've been in your class?
Then you're stuck with 2 weeks of quarantining. I mean, 2 weeks of separation, because that's how long it's going to take to prove that nobody else got it. And quite honestly, your health department will be doing all the contact tracing. So it's not even going to be up to you probably once that has been diagnosed. It's probably out of your hands, quite honestly. One of the things I meant to say too is that most of our kids are used to eating their way through class. They get treats, there should be absolutely no eating till this is over, because the kids will have their fingers in their mouths, and it's not worth it to risk the contamination. Fomites. I'm not sure that's probably not the phrase I should use. Real quick, fomites are anything that kids play with that have the bacteria or the virus or whatever on it. So you need to take the fomites out of your classroom. The kids who come running in, I know we have a big exercise ball in my room, which seems odd for 4th and 5th grade, but I think it's used for younger grades on Wednesday night. So the boys come in and they immediately get that and start throwing it around. But you can't have things like that, and you're going to have to move those things out for just a little bit. They can come back later in the year, but until we get down to where the cases are very, very rare in your area, you just can't have those things. That's going to be the hardest on the 3 and 4 year olds and stuff, where they're used to coming in and immediately starting to play while everybody is gathering, and they can't do that.
Yeah. Let me go back to this real quick. You mentioned fomite, and others have children's ministers. We don't know that word. This is anything that is your manipulatives in your classrooms, toys in your classroom, all those things that, if you think about nursery, when we're on nursery duty, we Lysol and wash everything. We cannot do that. We have a hard time doing that as nursery workers, right? We cannot do that for every single classroom all the way up through 5th grade. And really beyond, because your middle school and high schoolers don't need to be touching stuff. They don't need to be playing pool or ping pong. Couches are going to probably be an issue, because that's going to hold it. You can't Lysol a couch very well. So all of those kinds
Lysol
of
wipe,
things.
you can Lysol spray.
You can Lysol spray, okay. But all those kinds of things that you can't quickly wipe down, they come out, right, Debbie?
Yep.
Yeah.
You just have to. I think the biggest thing, and for little kids, they don't have a good sense of time. So when you say we're going to all get back to normal in a month, they don't know what in the world you're talking about, but they understand that today.
Yeah.
Soon.
And then we're still keeping the 6 foot distancing. I think you probably mentioned that. Their mats being 6 foot apart, which is okay, maybe in a class of 4 or 5. But if you get in classes of 20 and 25, that might start some issues. And that might be where people want to fudge a little on these restrictions and say, well, 4 feet's going to be enough, or not touching each other is going to be enough. But it's not, right? Like, we really need to stick to the 6 feet or more.
Yeah. And there are people who would say 8 to 10, but that's really out there.
Yeah.
But yeah, you can't fudge. Because as soon as you fudge, someone's going to get sick, and then the whole thing falls.
Yeah. So someone just asked, so we have to take everything out of kids' reach, no toys. What about all the big climbing things or slides in the nursery area?
Nope. Well, first off, they're in the nursery area, so the nursery kids aren't going to be there. If you're taking them directly to their class, the older kids aren't. I don't think that the older kids will have those things in their class. You're only counting above 3. Maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah. There's differences of opinion, I know, on how long the virus lives on a particular surface. And so I think you're leaning into this is the best possible solution, where there's no doubt that, no matter what, it's going to kill all the germs, and we don't have to worry. Okay.
And I'm being really probably more hyper than a lot of people would be, because they're in a smaller environment and they don't have as much illness in the area. But I think that you have to err on the side of being overcautious when you're talking about a big group, because the big group is going to suffer if one person goes awry.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, if you have a group of 25 and you have one child that is sick, that's 25 families that
Mhm,
are then isolated for 2 weeks.
mhm,
That's okay.
mhm.
That's what I understood. Just double
Yep,
checking.
yep, nope, that's it. Once the contact tracing comes in, all of the people who've been in contact with them, everybody in the class and all of their families are gonna be stuck at home for 2 weeks. Not
Wow,
even the grocery store.
wow. Bridget, I haven't. There's a lot of stuff happening now in the chat, so I'm not keeping up with it very well. What are you seeing there that we should talk about?
I think that hearing all the toys go away was alarming to people. Like, how do you keep preschoolers that are potty trained in their own rooms in one place? I mean, if there are no toys for them to manipulate, nothing for them to do while they're waiting for class
If
to start or at the end of
if
class.
you had enough of something that you could put them in their individual bags,
Okay.
you could do something like that.
Okay.
But you can't have one kid and then have him hand it to somebody else or have him put it down and somebody else pick it up.
And it says, is there any concern with children that put their hands in their mouths to use hand sanitizer in their high alcohol content? Is there any concern?
No, they're not going to get enough of it from that.
So this is, Jen mentioned, we discussed a scenario where we would lead a family class where a facilitator would lead individual families, spaced 6 feet apart, to participate in a lesson and activity. The family unit, how do you feel about something like that?
That would be fine. I mean, we have a Wednesday night program at our church where families come as a whole and the lesson is taught to the kids but the parents are there. And if the parents kept their kids together, you're still going to have to do something about sanitizing the whole room when it's over, but wiping down everything. But if the kids are with their family, I mean, that's what we're going to be doing during worship service. They're going to be sitting with their parents, and the parents are going to be, far apart. But in the worship service, I don't think the kids will be on, as much at risk of handling each other, touching each other, playing with each other. And you just watch these kids and they're like puppies. They're all over each other.
Yeah.
And you've got to figure out some way to keep that from happening without traumatizing them for life that they can't ever touch anything.
So Marla Finley is asking, do we need to purchase all new items for all children and for potential visitors, or are things that have been
purchase anything new? Once you separate it out in the beginning,
okay,
then they're gonna be separate. I mean, you've probably got a classroom that has, you've got a classroom with 12 kids in it. You've got a bucket that has 12 pairs of scissors. You just separate them out.
Okay.
You don't have to buy new.
Okay. And then how do you navigate a shared classroom space with a weekday school, and then you're using the same space here at church?
Is the weekday school still happening?
I don't know. That was from Danielle. Maybe she's just anticipating that it
By
would
next fall, it's going to be so much looser. And for the most part, there's a certain amount of responsibility for the vulnerable people to take on themselves, because they can't expect everybody to be quarantined forever because they're vulnerable. And that brings up another point. Looking at this screen, there's actually a fair number of young people here, but in some congregations, the older people are the ones who are disproportionately teaching the classes. And so when you get to that point where you're opening, you've got to give all of those people an opt-out without any judgment. And there's also people who have comorbidities, who have complicating issues that the church may not know about. People don't share everything with everybody. And so if you had somebody who could talk to teachers individually and say, ask them if they consider themselves at high risk, and if at this point they want to opt out of teaching for a while, there may be people who do that. I mean, there are people who are immunosuppressed who everyone may not know about. The old people like me, I mean, we know about them, but there are people who have things that you might not know, and they might not want to bring it up to everybody. but they need to have an opportunity to opt out of teaching for a while.
And that was one of the light bulbs that went off for me when we talked. I had not, I mean, I had thought about our volunteers, but I had not thought about our volunteers may not have disclosed, because it's their health. They don't have to disclose anything. So we may not know, and that they may feel guilty if they say no.
Right.
Or we may actually put too much pressure on them because we're assuming that they don't have an underlying health issue that puts them at risk.
Mm-hmm.
And so we could really do some damage in some ways just by putting people in a really bad situation
Mm-hmm.
that they might not feel comfortable telling us about or getting out of.
Mm-hmm.
They don't want to leave the church hanging, so they just, you know, soldier on and jump in and then put themselves at risk.
Mm-hmm.
Bridget, I see a lot more questions coming in.
Yes, I mean, there are people talking about shared spaces with preschools and other things that they believe are going to be able to have session this summer. So, I mean, that is a big concern for people, is what do they do about shared spaces? And there's another comment of, does it just seem best not to have Sunday school for ages under 7 that you really cannot count on to sit on their one square and use their one set of toys and stuff like that? So do you feel like
I kind of feel like you got to give them a chance,
okay?
because there are responsible 4-year-olds in the world, but you've got to figure out a way to deal with the not cooperative 4-year-old and not offend their family mightily.
Right. So what do you think about summer camp?
I think those are going to happen. Those actually might be easier if they're outside, because kids can be separated some. But I think any inside camps where you're all working on a common thing, like craft camps and things like that, art camps, some of those may just not have to happen this summer.
Right.
I mean, we're not going to be absolutely safe until there's a vaccine and a buy-in to a vaccine. And that's one of the things I worry about, is that, you know, as a pediatrician, I've spent my life trying to talk to anti-vaxxers about their kids. And for the most part, they're just relying on herd immunity. You know, they don't think their kid's going to get it because your kid's going to get the shot. But if there are people who take that approach to COVID, then that's going to be a whole different thing.
Mm-hmm.
Then where do you suggest providing diaper changes if we're not allowing kids in the nursery because they're in a diaper?
The kids can go to the nursery for diaper changes with their parents.
Okay, but just not in class.
They're not going to be able to leave their child there, or you know, be in a classroom with a bunch of other kids in diapers. If individual parents want to go in, and then I would think the parents would be motivated enough to wipe down the surface before they put their kid down. I suppose that could go in the newsletter, but they would need to wipe down surfaces before they put their kid there. And then the last thing you do before you leave the changing area is sanitize your hands.
So is the diaper change, to not allow children that are in diapers, is that for a long time until we get a vaccine for COVID, or?
I would say so.
Let me jump in. If you look at the CDC website with their recommendations for childcare, and I'll put a link to it on my blog later today, so you don't have to go look for it. They give some very specific instructions for diaper changing that follows right along with what Debbie's saying. Just sanitizing was fine. I mean, they talk about wiping everything down with Lysol wipes. They talk about making sure you secure all of, you know, the trash in the separate bag and all that, things that we probably do anyway. I think maybe the big issue with nursery, diaper changes is an issue, but I see diaper leakage as the bigger issue. Because we can change in a sanitary way, but we all know that sometimes a baby has a blowout and it's gross and it's everywhere. And then what do we do? So keeping parents responsible for their own babies might be a better thing. Keep those germs, right in the family and not allow it to be spread.
Right.
Yeah. Let's see. Oh, this is a good one, Marla. and Debbie, we talked about this some, would toddlers and preschoolers be allowed to walk and run around, or where they need to be held in strollers while in the building?
I think they'd have to be held because you can't control them. They have to stay with their parents. And if their parents set them down, they have to keep a hand on them.
And then if we have cry rooms for parents with their own baby, just 6 feet apart, or? Okay.
Yep. Have your baby and stay away from everybody else with their baby.
Yeah. Another thing you said the other day on the phone that really caught me by surprise is limiting the movement in the hallways. And it wasn't just about pickup time and staggering pickup time and making sure families aren't all in the same space, but also thinking about where all does that family travel? Because if you have a family of 4 or 5 traveling down a hallway and one of them become exposed to the virus, they've exposed everyone potentially that's in that hallway, and that might be some of your older members that's trying to social distance and take care of themselves, but they're still in this location where they're going to be exposed.
Yeah, you just do the best you can. Keeping the adults should be 6 feet apart too. And that's actually going to be a little bit of a problem for some of them, because I can tell you a personal story is that one of our congregation members I was with, and we were parting, and I said, I'm not going to shake your hand. And his response was, that's okay. And then he pulled me into a bear hug. And I'm going, no, 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 no. So the adults have to be educated too. Some of them don't think through.
Yeah. Bridget?
Yes, I mean, David asked about the AC fan not heating or cooling, just circulating air for air circulation. Does that make a difference or make anything better or worse, or?
No, you're not going to be able to stop that. You know, it's not hanging in the air. It's going from person to person. The virus has to have a place to live, and our job is to not let it have a place to live. It's not going to just hang in the air indefinitely. And you can't live in a bubble, but you cannot give it a place to live in you.
So a staffed nursery during worship service, you're saying that is not okay? Okay.
That is not okay.
Okay.
Marla's been asking really great questions, and a lot of them come down to, I'm going to summarize, but a lot of them come down to how is the child going to experience this? So if we're telling them you have to be socially distanced, you can't hug, you can't be around you can't be close to each other, things that we would typically do, what's going to be the effect over time? So I think we're talking about emotional and mental health also.
Right. That's a real difficult one, because it depends. They get a lot of their cues from their parents. And if their parents can stay calm, they will stay calm. If their parents can present it as, for right now, we just want everybody to be well, let's just for a little while not give our hugs and kisses, except to your family. But if they go, no, don't let Johnny touch you, then they're going to get a lot more upset. But I think if the parents are calmer, the kids can stay calmer. And the parents have a lot of worries too. I mean, they just do. But they have to kind of hold it together.
And then someone asked about fist bumps and, like substitutions for hugs that we
Not
typically do during flu season, but none of that's going to work.
I wouldn't do any of it now. I would just not touch each other for now.
Okay. Bridget, you see something else there?
Someone mentioned doing pop-up tents outside to help have fresh air. Would that be good?
Anytime you can be doing stuff outside is better than doing it in a closed room. I mean, that's one of the big things I tell my patients. You're not getting the flu because it's cold outside. You're getting the flu because you're inside because it's cold outside. So that's why colds are worse in the winter more than when you get out.
So is there anything for children's ministers to do for kids who cannot participate in classes? Like, what do you suggest?
Well, that's a good thought. But again, at that point, it's up to their parents to let them have access to something. I know that our children's minister sends out every week a bunch of lessons and games and stuff. And she's honestly quite depressed because none of the parents access it. But if you can give them things to do, give them pages to color or things that you're talking about that they can do with their parents while their parents are sitting with them outside of class. But everything has to stay within them.
See, someone asked about overnight camps. I'm going to go with that's a no-no, right? There's no way to social distance
right
that.
now.
I had to cancel our overnight camp a couple of weeks ago after I don't know how many hours we've spent planning.
I know.
Finally got the phone call that we're going to cancel it, and we pretty much made the decision we were going to have to no matter what. But that's a disappointing thing, and we need to recognize that we have emotions about these things. That we it does hurt to have to say no in order to keep our kids safe.
Yep.
It's still the right thing to do.
So when was your camp scheduled for, Shannon?
Second week of June.
Okay, so what about in July? I mean, do you think we all need to be canceling those already?
I know in our area they haven't quite made decisions about July. I'll put on my camp director hat. I would not take kids to an overnight camp this summer.
No, I wouldn't either.
It takes one kid.
Mm-hmm.
And I've lived that. Some of y'all have heard it. I call it apocalypse camp, but I've lived it where one person we think came with a stomach virus.
Oh.
And for 30% of the camp suddenly goes down all at the same time. And most of them were adults.
Mm-hmm.
And we had to call parents and call churches and say, get your church vans here, get your buses here. We're shutting down 2 days early, putting sick kids on buses. So I look at it from that experience. I've lived it. I don't want to live it again. And that probably was not as communicable, is that the word for it, as what we're talking about with COVID. So,
but I think you got to also keep in mind that most of the children are not going to be very symptomatic. So they can still spread it without having symptoms, which is probably one of the biggest things about this.
Which is Danielle just posted a question about that. If that's still the general thought, I think I'm reading it. Okay, Bridget, tell me if I'm misreading it. But if that's still the general thought that children they may be more resilient, they may not show symptoms, but they're still little germ carriers, right? Like we have to recognize that.
Yeah. We've recognized it with other illnesses. I mean, like little children don't get mono like teenagers get mono, but they still get the mono. They just aren't sick. So, I mean, this isn't the first virus that's been asymptomatic in one age group or another. Or, it goes the other way too. There are some that affect children. Their parents will get it, but they won't be sick.
Yeah.
So it makes it harder to control it, actually.
So Debbie, do you see a situation where if there are parents that are not very skilled at controlling their children,
mm-hmm.
and their children are not controlled well in the classroom, that we have to ask them not to come to church during this time?
I think we have to make it conditional. I mean, I can picture one family at our church where they have no control over their children at all. And the kids will not follow rules, I'm sure. And we're just going to have some real hard discussions and say, you can't make the whole church maybe close because of this one situation.
I see people asking about specific events, camps and LVBSs and other specific events. Can I just summarize what I think might be the best advice there with if you can't follow guidelines such as these that Debbie's given, that the CDC is also suggesting because they're right along the same line, then all activities that cannot follow those guidelines, it's the easy answer. You don't have them, right? Like,
yep.
I can't imagine saying Bible class is going to be a little too hard for us, but we can do VBS. Or a camp. It just gets more difficult.
Yeah, and the more exceptions you make, the more exceptions you'll be expected to make.
Yeah.
The more people will come to you, but what if, but what if, but what if?
Mm.
And if you're just consistent, then that's going to be easier for everybody to understand.
We're almost out of time, so I want to maybe summarize a few things. Do you have any last things you want to say to the ministers, Debbie?
Just that it's going to be difficult for you, and you are going to have tough skin in some places, because you're a group that gives and gives and gives, and sometimes people don't understand the motivations for some of the things you do, and you're going to have to just know that, the one person that we're really, the audience of one is knows what's going on.
Yeah, thank you for that. Okay, so just some summaries here. Yeah, I still see these questions about what about other activities. One of the things as children's ministers that we're wanting to know is if we can't do this, so if we can't go back to doing Bible classes, which I don't know about you, but I hear these guidelines and I think this is bad timing. Like to go back, and if I have to do this with kids, the reality is it's probably just bad timing to go back, and we need to look at other options. That's the safest route for everyone. And so then we've talked about intergenerational classes in worship. I see some things popping up about at-home VBSs or backyard VBSs where it's just a family or family next door with them and still the group of 10. I want to try to get some of those resources together for you, and I'd love to do another Zoom call with that. If we could do Zoom calls every single day, I don't know if we could get to all the questions that we have right now about how to do ministry in COVID. But I'll make a note of that and make sure we get back to that. I know you need those resources. I also want to recognize, and Debbie did this just now too, but I want to recognize the incredible load that you have right now, that you have on yourself. For many of you, you went from face-to-face church to online church in less than a week. I think we found out on like a Wednesday and they had to have stuff online by Sunday. That is an incredible amount of work. That is hard. That's hard stuff. That's ministry, but it's ministry that eventually you're going to burn out with. And so it's okay to back off and say there's some things that we can say no to. And if we need to say these things, and this is why I'm saying it in a video, if we need to say these things strongly so elders and ministers hear you and we're advocating for you, like Debbie just did, I'm trying to, hopefully they'll hear this at the end of the video. I'll talk to them, elders and ministers, leaders, see what your children's ministers are doing. They're doing great things, and it's almost impossible to carry on. And so all of you think about, what does simple ministry look like right now? What does it look like what is your vision, and how do you achieve that in the most simple ways possible? Because you need to be in a marathon if you're going to minister to our families well. I'm thankful for the suggestions that Debbie's given. But one of the things I hear as I listen to those is this isn't the right time if it's going to be this hard. But I know that some of your elders are ready, and that they're going to jump in no matter what you say, because they have other voices speaking into the situation too. And so hopefully this information is something you can hand them, and you can say to them, okay, if we're going to do this thing, here's the guidelines that we've got to follow, and you have to help. Because you as one person cannot pull this off for your whole ministry. And it's been said already once, I want to say it again, many of your volunteers are in that older age range where there's more likely to have the pre-existing conditions that they have to be better at social distancing and self-quarantine. And if you lose all of those volunteers and your young parents are not the ones filling your classrooms, we all know recruiting is hard. It's hard stuff. It's going to be harder when half your volunteer base goes away. Mm-hmm. So I think right now, leaning into a couple of things. One is leaning into the idea of rest. And Trey Finley's on here. He and I talked about this earlier this week. 1128 Ministries. Go to their website. Think about what does it look like to teach parents and church members Sabbath right now. That it's okay not to be go-getters. It's okay to just be with God. And let that inform us. Let that heal us. I think it's also okay to have, and it's probably a good thing, to have some conversations about intergenerational ministry. This is a research interest of mine. Jennifer Schroeder's on here, Ron Bruner. We've been researching and writing on this for a little bit now. This is the time to, if you're going to be in the church building together, let the parents be that primary spiritual caregiver, right? If you're going to be in the auditorium, parents and children need to sit together, but then think about what worship looks like in that context. What can you do? What can ministers do to make sure that children are not just passive onlookers in worship, but they are fully included? And that means changing up your worship service a little bit. Because the last thing we need to communicate to children right now is that they are not worth it. Okay, so we find the safe ways to do this, and we do the changes we have to do, and we make sure that children know that their spiritual formation is just as valued, and their spiritual voices are just as valued as the adults in the auditorium. And I'll refrain from preaching on that. I see my friends going, yeah. I want to say that next week will be Dr. David Hurley. I wish I could do it sooner, but I don't know. I think we just would be pushing things pretty hard to do 2 Zoom calls in a week. And so we're going to talk some about this issue of, is it the right time? And if it's not the right time, what's some other things that we can do? And children's ministers, I know you also need to hear some voices of other children's ministers. And so we'll think about that too, about how we can get people on to brainstorm. What does this look like? What's practical suggestions? But right now what we need is the information, because that's got to inform our next move. So that's what Debbie's done for us. Thank you, Dr. Zincanero. Did I say it right that time?
You did.
I feel like I deserve a pat on the back for that.
Yes.
I'm so bad at names. But thank you for taking the time to do this and speaking wise truth into the situation, and giving us advice.
My pleasure.
Experience.
My pleasure.
I appreciate it.
Debbie, there's all kinds of thank yous on the chat. I don't know if you can see
Oh,
it.
that's nice.
But I would like, before everyone gets off the call and before Shannon dismisses us, in the chat, if you can, put how you found out about the meeting so that we can know the best way to publicize if we have other Zoom calls like this. So if you could just put on there how you found out about it. Thank you, Debbie, for your wisdom.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for everything, Bridget and Shannon.
You're welcome. Thank you. Well,
All right,
friends,
be strong, guys.
it's time to sign off. I'd like to say a quick prayer over us.
Sure.
And then as I tell my students every time, we will hang out until the last person logs off and be prepared. I think we have that time. Do we have that time, Bridget? Or will it kick us off? Okay.
We've got it.
Okay, so we'll hang out for a few minutes, and if anybody needs to just stay in chat for another minute or two, we'll do that for you too. And I think we're all available anytime to talk with you also. So just shoot me emails, shoot Bridget an email, and then we'll work on finding out information for you. So let's pray. Dear God, these are times that are hard and that we never envisioned ourselves going through. These are times that are confusing and we don't know all the answers. These are times that we try to see the vision for what's next, and it's hard to see what tomorrow will bring. But we know that you're right in the middle of all of it, that you're with us and in us, and you're walking this journey with us, and that it's okay to be still and listen to your spirit and let your spirit inform what's next. God, we thank you for the wisdom of those who have careers and professions that can speak into this situation, that can help us get our minds around the difficultness of this and what safe practices might look like. God, we thank you for each of these ministers, for the work that they're doing, for the time that they're pouring out, for their hearts that they are pouring out. Continue to fill them with courage and strength and renew them. Keep them safe as first responders in many ways. Keep them safe. But also provide them time to just pull away and be with you and to have their spirits renewed and filled. This is a long journey. In your son's name I pray. Amen.